She called my cell phone the day the notice arrived. No pleasantries this time. She told me 14 days of closure was impossible. She told me 84 families depended on that tunnel. She told me she would call the county, call her attorney, contact the state DOT. And then she said it, loud, through the phone, from a woman who had not yet understood a single thing about my background. "Open this tunnel!" I was standing at the eastern portal when she said it, 14 inches of exposed rebar above my head, an active crack moving 2.6 millimeters and climbing. Free water seeping through a wall that 2 engineering firms had just classified as Category 3 deterioration. I told her the tunnel was open. It would stay open for 60 days, exactly as the easement I owned required. I'm a retired civil engineer with 38 years in tunnel design. I bought 1,200 acres and the only road through the ridge. She never asked who I was, starting from the top, as always. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so comment below and subscribe. The closing was on a Thursday morning in early September, in the offices of a title company on the main road of the Rutherford County seat, a single-story brick building with a conference room in the back that smelled of coffee and the particular neutral air of a space where significant transactions happened routinely enough that the significance had worn off the furniture. Clem Hargrove sat at the table with his reading glasses on and the closing package in front of him and read every page before he signed it. The title company's closing agent, a woman in her 40s who had done this work for 15 years and had learned to read buyers in the first 5 minutes, had brought her own coffee and settled in without comment when Clem opened the package to page 1 rather than flipping to the signature tabs. She had seen the type before. Engineers, attorneys, accountants. The buyers who treated a closing package as a document to be read rather than a formality to be completed. They took longer. They caught things. She had learned to appreciate them. Clem read the deed. He read the legal description, the full metes and bounds of the 1,200-acre parcel, the bearings and distances running from the southwest corner monument north along the ridge face, east across the plateau, south along the creek drainage, west back to the starting point. He had walked every boundary segment during due diligence. He knew the land's shape the way he had always known the geometry of the infrastructure he designed, not as an abstraction on paper, but as a physical fact he had confirmed with his own movement across it. The legal description matched what he had walked. He initialed the page. He read the title commitment, the exceptions, the Schedule B items. He read the easement instruments listed in the exceptions, 3 of them, each recorded in the Rutherford County Deed Index, each referenced by book and page. He had already pulled all 3 from the county recorder's database during due diligence and read them in full. He read them again in the closing package, not because he had forgotten what they said, but because a closing was the last moment before a transaction became permanent, and permanent things deserved a final reading. The third easement, Book 34, page 218, recorded June 1998, was the one that mattered most. He read it with the same attention he had given it the first 2 times. He turned to the maintenance cost-sharing clause on page 4. He read the percentages. He read the condition language. He read the definition of the easement holder. He read the remediation notice requirements. He turned back to page 1 and read the grant language again. Non-exclusive vehicular access through the tunnel for residential ingress and egress. He initialed the page. He signed where the tabs indicated. He handed the package back to the closing agent. He was 67 years old, and he had just bought 1,200 acres of Rutherford County ridge country, a former mining and timber tract, and the only vehicular tunnel through the limestone ridge for 11 miles in either direction. The land had been a single parcel since 1961. The Harlan Mining Company had assembled it in 3 acquisitions over the 1950s, timber rights first, then the surface estate, then the mineral estate, and consolidated the holdings into one deed in 1961, when the ridge's mining potential had been confirmed by core sampling, and the company had committed to the operation. They had run the mine through 1987, the limestone extraction funding the company's operations for 26 years before the deposit played out and the economics of the operation inverted, and the company began the process of winding down. The tunnel had been cut in 1974, a single-bore vehicular crossing, 380 feet through the limestone ridge at the parcel's western boundary. The the bore diameter sufficient for a loaded dump truck to pass, the grade gentle enough to allow loaded equipment access from the county road on the west face to the mining plateau on the east. The mining company had done the engineering themselves. Company engineers, 1974 methodology, the bore lined with concrete in the sections where the limestone fractured and left open where the rock was competent. The portal structures at each end were reinforced concrete head walls, formed and poured on site, the rebar schedule designed for the loads the mining operation would put on them. When the mine closed in 1987, the tunnel stayed. There was nothing else to do with it. A 380-foot limestone bore did not fill in, did not deteriorate quickly if the drainage was maintained, did not require active management beyond keeping the lighting working and the portals clear. The Harlan Mining Company sold the property in 1991 to a timber investment firm that had no use for the tunnel, but no reason to seal it either. The timber firm held the land for 7 years, harvested 2 rotations of the managed timber stands on the plateau, and sold in 1998 to a residential developer who saw the eastern plateau's potential, the elevation, the views, the flat buildable ground, and understood immediately that the tunnel was the asset that made the development possible. The developer, a firm out of Charlotte, had bought the 1,200 acres and immediately begun the process of developing the eastern plateau portion into a gated residential community, Laurel Bluff Estates. 84 lots platted on the plateau's buildable area, the western portion of the 1,200 acres, the ridge face, the tunnel, the approach road, retained as a separate parcel under the developer's ownership. The developer had sold the 84 lots and the common areas to the HOA as the homes were built, retaining the western parcel and the tunnel approach as a separate asset. The 1998 easement was the instrument that made the development legally viable, a recorded grant of non-exclusive vehicular access through the tunnel, running with the land, binding on all future owners of the western parcel, in favor of all future owners of the Laurel Bluff Estates lots. The developer had negotiated it with himself, granting the easement from the western parcel to the eastern development in the same transaction structure that created both. It was clean enough as legal architecture went. The maintenance cost sharing was the sophisticated element. The eastern plateau users would pay 60% of tunnel maintenance costs, reflecting their greater dependency on the access, while the western parcel owner paid 40% as the landowner of record. The western parcel had changed hands twice after the developer sold the eastern lots. A private buyer in 2004, who had used it for hunting and timber. A holding company in 2016, which had done nothing with it for 7 years and sold it when the principals retired. Clem had bought it from the holding company in September of this year. The 1,200 acres, the ridge, the tunnel, the easement, all of it. Clem Hargrove had spent 38 years as a civil engineer. He had started with a municipal engineering firm in Asheville in 1984, 2 years after his degree from NC State, and had worked his way through the categories of infrastructure that a mid-size engineering firm in western North Carolina touched in the course of its practice: road design, bridge engineering, stormwater management, retaining structures, and, beginning in 1991, when the firm picked up a DOT contract for a mountain highway improvement project, tunnel engineering. He had spent the last 22 years of his career specializing in it. He had designed or supervised the design of 11 tunnel projects in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee. He had assessed the structural condition of 19 more: existing tunnels, highway tunnels, rail tunnels, utility tunnels, for DOT, for municipal clients, for private owners who needed to know what they had before they decided what to do with it. He understood the failure modes of bored tunnels in limestone karst terrain. He understood portal deterioration, the particular vulnerability of concrete head walls, to the combination of water infiltration, freeze-thaw cycling, and the alkali-silica reaction that attacked older concrete mixes when moisture was present. He understood what Category 3 deterioration looked like from 20 feet and what it meant for the structure's timeline. He had read more recorded easements in the course of 38 years of infrastructure work than most attorneys read in a career. Easements ran with infrastructure, the way infrastructure ran with land. They were the legal instrument that gave a road or a pipeline or a tunnel its relationship to the parcels it crossed or served, and understanding that relationship was as much a part of engineering work as understanding the load calculations. You could not design a maintenance plan for a shared infrastructure asset without reading the instrument that defined the sharing. You could not advise a client on an infrastructure acquisition without understanding what the recorded documents said about who owed what to whom and under what conditions. He had known, when the listing for the 1,200-acre Rutherford County parcel came across his desk in the spring, that the tunnel was the most important element of the acquisition, not because of its size. 380 feet was a modest bore by the standards of the projects he had worked on, but because of its function. A tunnel that was the only vehicular crossing of a ridge for 11 miles, serving as the sole access point for 84 residential households, was not just infrastructure, it was leverage. Not leverage in the aggressive sense. Clem was not a man who thought in those terms, but leverage in the engineering sense, a single point through which a great deal depended, a structural element whose condition and ownership mattered disproportionately to everything downstream of it. He had wanted land outside a subdivision. He had wanted acreage he could walk and manage and build on without covenant authority over his decisions. He had wanted the particular freedom of a large rural parcel with a clear deed and no HOA in the county index that touched it. The Rutherford County tract gave him all of that, and one thing more: a recorded easement with a maintenance cost-sharing clause that had not been honored in 4 years. He had known about the arrears before closing. The previous owner's disclosure had included the maintenance payment history and the settlement the prior owner had accepted. Clem had read the settlement document, confirmed it did not release future obligations, and adjusted his offer accordingly. He had priced the acquisition to account for the remediation work he already suspected the eastern portal needed. He had factored the HOA's payment history into his assessment of how the first conversation with Miriam Stokes was likely to go. He had closed on the land with his eyes open. He always did. The drive from the county seat to the property took 34 minutes on the Thursday of closing. Southeast on the state highway, east on the county road, the road climbing as the ridge rose ahead of it. The limestone formation visible in the road cuts where the county had cut through the lower ridge face to grade the road in 1968. The county road ended at a gate in Clem's fence line, a steel farm gate, padlocked, the fence running north and south from the gate posts along the western boundary of the parcel. Beyond the gate, the access road ran east 200 feet to the western portal of the tunnel. Clem had a key to the gate. He had driven through it a dozen times during due diligence. He drove through it now as the owner of record, got out to close and lock the gate behind him, and drove to the western portal. He parked and got out and stood at the tunnel mouth. The bore ran east through 380 feet of limestone, the portal opening roughly 14 feet wide and 12 feet tall. The concrete headwall surrounding it stained with decades of water runoff from the ridge face above. The lighting strips inside visible as a line of fluorescent white receding into the bore. The air coming out of the tunnel was cool and mineral. The temperature inside the bore stayed near 58 degrees year-round, the limestone mass moderating the seasonal extremes. He could see the eastern portal as a rectangle of daylight at the far end. He stood there for a moment. He was not a sentimental man. 38 years of engineering work had given him a practical relationship with infrastructure, the appreciation that came from understanding how things were built and what it took to keep them working, rather than the aesthetic appreciation a non-engineer might bring to a limestone tunnel on a fall afternoon in Rutherford County. But he stood there for a moment anyway. Then he got back in the truck and drove through. The call from Miriam Stokes came 8 days after closing. He was at the kitchen table of the farmhouse on the western plateau, the structure that had come with the property, a 4-room farmhouse built by the Harlan Mining Company in 1962 for the site supervisor, maintained adequately but not improved in 30 years, with the tunnel's structural records spread in front of him. The mining company's original bore logs from 1974, the concrete pour records, the DOT inspection from 1999, conducted when the county had briefly considered whether the tunnel qualified for state maintenance funding, before determining it did not because it was private property. The previous owner's maintenance invoices to the HOA from 2019 and 2020, both disputed, both unpaid. He answered on the third ring. Miriam Stokes introduced herself, HOA President, Laurel Bluff Estates, calling to welcome him to the area. Her voice carried the particular register of someone who had a secondary agenda they were managing alongside the stated one. Clem recognized it. He had been in enough project meetings to know the sound of a person who had prepared talking points. She told him she hoped the transition had gone smoothly. She told him the community had always had a good relationship with the Western Parcel's owners. She told him she expected the tunnel access to continue exactly as it always had. And there it was, the secondary agenda surfacing in the third minute of a welcome call. That the community depended on the tunnel for everything. That 84 families had built their lives around that access. And that she hoped he understood the responsibility that came with owning the tunnel approach. Clem listened to all of it. He thanked her for calling. He told her it was good to be in the county. He said very little else. After he ended the call, he sat at the kitchen table for a moment, with his coffee and the 1974 bore logs in front of him. Then he picked up his measuring tape and his field notebook and his headlamp and drove to the eastern portal. He wanted to see the head wall up close. He already knew what he was going to find. The structural assessment began on the third Monday of October, 6 weeks after closing, the Rutherford County Ridge Country in the early stages of its fall color change. The hardwoods on the upper slope going yellow at the crowns, while the lower elevation vegetation was still green. Clem had scheduled the assessment the week after closing. He had called 3 geotechnical firms, one in Asheville, one in Charlotte, one in Spartanburg, described the project, and selected the Asheville firm on the basis of their tunnel assessment experience. They had done condition assessments on 7 mountain tunnels in the previous 8 years, all of them in the limestone karst terrain of western North Carolina, and their project engineer had the specific background Clem was looking for. Not just general geotechnical work, but the particular discipline of evaluating bored tunnel structures in carbonate rock, where the failure modes were different from the sedimentary formations that most geotechnical training addressed. 3 engineers arrived Monday morning at 7 a.m. Clem met them at the western portal gate. He had prepared the site. The lighting strips checked and all functioning. The portal approaches clear. The bore walked twice in the previous week, and any loose debris noted and removed. He had printed his own condition notes from the preliminary walk, the observations he had made with his headlamp and his measuring tape the week after closing, the photographs he had taken of the eastern portal headwall. He handed the file to the project engineer at the gate. The project engineer, a woman in her mid-40s named Sandra Price, whom Clem had spoken with twice by phone before the assessment, read through the file while her 2 associates unloaded the equipment from the firm's van. Core sampling rig, crack monitors, the mechanical gauges that bonded to a concrete surface and measured crack width change over time, a photographic documentation rig with calibrated scale markers, moisture meters, a structural hammer for the sounding work. She looked at Clem's photographs of the eastern portal and then looked at him over the file. She said, "You've done this before." He told her 38 years. He told her he had assessed 19 tunnels in his career, and he knew what he was looking at on the eastern portal. And he wanted the firm's independent documentation and classification to go alongside his own observations. She nodded. She told her associates to start with the bore section and work east. They spent 2 full days inside the tunnel. The bore assessment took most of the first day. The 380-foot interior, section by section. The engineers moving systematically from the western portal east, examining the concrete lining in the sections where it existed, and the exposed limestone in the competent rock sections. They tapped the concrete with the structural hammer, the acoustic response distinguishing sound concrete from delaminated concrete where the bond between the concrete and the rock surface had broken down. They noted 4 delamination zones in the lining, none of them critical, all of them consistent with the normal deterioration profile of a 50-year-old concrete tunnel lining in a wet limestone environment. They bonded crack monitors at 3 locations where the lining showed longitudinal cracking. The cracking was old. The monitors would establish whether it was active or arrested. The bore section was, as Clem had assessed in his preliminary walk, structurally sound. The limestone competent rock section showed no signs of block movement or fresh fracturing. The drainage at the bore floor was functioning. The water table below the tunnel invert. The bore dry except for the controlled seepage at the 2 lining joints where the previous owner had installed weep pipes. The weep pipes were doing their job. The eastern portal was a different assessment. Sandra Price spent the morning of the second day on the eastern head wall, the concrete structure at the tunnel's exit face, the wall that bore the load of the ridge material above the portal opening and transferred it to the foundation footings on either side. She worked from the top down, starting at the crown where the head wall met the rock face above and working toward the portal sill. She was methodical, and she did not hurry. Clem watched from a distance that gave her room to work, and kept him close enough to see what she was seeing. The spalling was extensive, not catastrophic. The head wall was not in imminent danger of collapse, which was the question that mattered first, and the answer was no. But the surface concrete had broken away in sheets across approximately 40% of the head wall face, and where the concrete had broken away, the rebar beneath was exposed. 14 inches of rebar visible along the crown section, the top of the head wall where the load was greatest, and where water running off the ridge face had been infiltrating the concrete for years. Exposed rebar in a wet environment corroded. Corroding rebar expanded. Expanding rebar fractured the surrounding concrete. The cycle was self-reinforcing, and it had been running, untreated, for at minimum 8 years based on the corrosion depth Sandra measured on the exposed steel. She found the alkali-silica reaction cracking in the lower third of the head wall, the characteristic map cracking pattern, fine cracks running in all directions across the concrete surface, the result of the chemical reaction between the alkali content of the cement paste and the silica in the aggregate, a reaction that produced a gel that absorbed moisture and expanded, and slowly destroyed the concrete matrix from the inside. The ASR cracking in the lower third was active. The moisture content of the head wall concrete was elevated throughout. She photographed everything. She bonded additional crack monitors. She took core samples from 3 locations in the head wall. The cores would go to the lab for petrographic analysis to confirm the ASR diagnosis and quantify the reaction extent. At the end of the second day, she sat with Clem at the tailgate of his truck at the eastern portal approach and told him what she had found. She said the bore was sound. She said the eastern portal head wall was a Category 3 deterioration condition under the FHWA tunnel inspection rating system, the classification that meant significant deterioration requiring remediation, not immediate closure, but remediation within a defined window before the condition advanced to Category 4. Which was the classification that meant closure. She said the timeline for Category 4 progression without intervention was 18 to 36 months, with the range reflecting the uncertainty in how quickly the ASR reaction would advance. Clem told her he had estimated the same range from his preliminary walk. She told him she knew. She had read his notes. He pulled the maintenance records the same week the assessment team was on site. The previous owner, the holding company that had sold to Clem in September, had provided the maintenance records as part of the due diligence package, and Clem had read them before closing. But he read them again now, with the eastern portal's condition in front of him, and the cost-sharing clause of the easement on the table beside the records. The pattern was clear, and the arithmetic was straightforward. From 2017 through 2019, the HOA had paid its 60% maintenance share on schedule, the annual invoices from the previous owner going out in January, the HOA's checks arriving by March. The amounts were modest. Annual tunnel maintenance in that period ran between $8,000 and $12,000 per year. The HOA's share between $4,800 and $7,200. Lighting replacements, portal drainage cleaning, the annual inspection by a licensed inspector, the easement required. Routine maintenance on a structure that was in adequate condition at that point, before the eastern portal deterioration had advanced to the stage it was at now. In 2020, the HOA had received the January invoice, $11,400, the HOA's 60% share, $6,840, and disputed it. The letter of dispute cited the assessment methodology. The HOA's position was that the previous owner had not obtained competitive bids for the maintenance work, and therefore the cost basis was inflated. The previous owner had responded with documentation of the work and the contractor invoices. The HOA had not paid. In 2021, the same pattern: invoice, dispute, non-payment. The HOA's 2021 dispute letter cited a different objection: the previous owner's failure to provide advance notice of maintenance activities, which the HOA claimed was a requirement under the easement. The easement did not contain that requirement. The previous owner had pointed this out. The HOA had not paid. The arrears through the end of 2021 totaled $34,800. In early 2022, the previous owner, the holding company's principals approaching their own retirement and wanting the matter resolved, had accepted a settlement of $9,000 against the $34,800 in arrears. The settlement document was a one-page agreement. The HOA pays $9,000. The previous owner releases the claim for prior arrears. Warren Ash, when Clem called him after closing, had read the settlement document in 10 minutes and confirmed what Clem had already concluded. The settlement released past arrears only. It contained no language releasing the HOA's future obligations under the easement. The cost-sharing clause remained fully in force for all maintenance costs incurred after the settlement date. The $9,000 settlement check had arrived at the holding company in March 2022. No maintenance contributions had been made since. The letter from Miriam Stokes arrived on a Tuesday in the third week of October, the same week Sandra Price's team was completing the core sample laboratory analysis. The preliminary report in Clem's inbox, but the final report still 2 weeks out. The letter was in the mailbox at the county road end of the Western Approach Road, where Clem had established a rural delivery address after closing. It was on Laurel Bluff Estates HOA letterhead, the association's name at the top and the typeface the HOA used for official communications, the address of the community clubhouse below it, Miriam Stokes's name and title at the signature block. It was 2 pages, single-spaced, and it had been written by someone who believed that the formal presentation of a letter conveyed authority that the letter's actual content might not support on its own. Clem read it at the kitchen table with his coffee. The first paragraph informed him that the Laurel Bluff Estates community had noted the presence of engineering personnel and equipment in the tunnel over the previous 2 days, and wished to be kept informed of any planned changes to tunnel operations. The second paragraph stated that the tunnel was the community's sole access point, and that any interruption of that access would be unacceptable to the 84 families who depended on it. The word unacceptable was in that paragraph. It appeared again in the fourth paragraph, which stated that the community expected to have advance notice of and input into any maintenance, assessment, or operational decision that might affect tunnel access, and that proceeding without such consultation would be unacceptable. The letter requested that Clem provide the HOA with a written summary of the assessment findings, a description of any planned maintenance or remediation, and a schedule of any anticipated access interruptions, all within 14 days. It was signed, Miriam Stokes, President, Laurel Bluff Estates Homeowners Association. Clem read it once. He set it down on the table. He picked up the easement instrument, Book 34, page 218, the copy he had printed from the county recorder's database and kept in the property folder, and opened it to the maintenance cost-sharing clause on page 4. He read the clause. He read the definition of the easement holder's obligations. He read the grant language on page 1. He read the conditions specified on page 3, safe operating condition, lighting maintained, no obstructions. He read the remediation notice requirements on page 5. He set the easement down next to Miriam's letter. He looked at the 2 documents side by side on the kitchen table for a moment. The letter asserting that the HOA had the right to advance notice of and input into his assessment and maintenance decisions. The easement granting non-exclusive vehicular access through the tunnel for residential ingress and egress, and specifying nothing further about the tunnel owner's operational authority. He picked up his phone and called Warren Ash. Warren answered on the second ring. He had been practicing property law in Rutherford County for 31 years, since before the Laurel Bluff Estates development had been conceived, since before the 1998 easement had been drafted, since before Miriam Stokes had moved into the county. He had a voice that carried the particular quality of a man who had read a very large number of recorded instruments over 3 decades and had developed a precise economy of language about what they said and did not say. Clem described the letter. He read Warren the key passages, the advance notice requirement, the input into operational decisions, the word unacceptable in its 2 appearances. Warren asked him to read the grant language from the easement. Clem read it. Non-exclusive vehicular access through the tunnel structure located on the western parcel for the residential ingress and egress of the owners and occupants of the Laurel Bluff Estates lots, as recorded in Rutherford County Plat Book 18, pages 4 through 9. Warren was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, "That's an access grant. It's not a management agreement." Clem told him he had read it the same way. Warren told him he would look at the full instrument and the letter both and call him back. He called back in 2 hours. His assessment was complete, and it was precise, and it was, Clem noted, exactly what the documents said when you read them without the overlay of what one party wished they said. The easement granted passage. It granted the HOA's residents the right to drive through the tunnel to reach their homes. It granted nothing else. It did not grant the HOA authority over the tunnel owner's maintenance schedule. It did not grant the HOA authority over assessment decisions. It did not grant the HOA advance notice rights beyond those specified in the remediation notice clause, which required notice before a closure, not before an assessment, and which set a specific notice period and format that Clem was required to follow when the time came. The letter's assertion that Clem needed the HOA's input into his operational decisions had no basis in the easement. The letter's assertion that advance notice of an assessment was required had no basis in the easement. The letter's use of the word unacceptable was, Warren said, the HOA president's opinion, which she was entitled to hold, and which the easement instrument did not make legally relevant. Warren told Clem he would draft a response. Clem told him to take whatever time he needed to do it right. He ended the call. He looked at Miriam's letter on the kitchen table. He looked at the easement beside it. He picked up his coffee mug and found it cold. He went to the kitchen and made a fresh pot. The final geotechnical report was 2 weeks out. The eastern portal's condition was documented in Sandra Price's preliminary notes and would be classified formally in the final. The cost-sharing clause was in force. The HOA's payment history since 2022 was a straight line of zeros. The letter on his kitchen table had used the word unacceptable twice. Clem poured the coffee and went back to the table and opened his field notebook to a fresh page. He had work to do. Warren Ash's office was on the second floor of a building on the county seat's main road, a 2-room practice. Warren and a paralegal named Ruth, who had worked with him for 19 years and who managed the filing system with the particular authority of someone who knew where everything was and intended to keep it that way. Warren had been in that office since 1993. Before that, he had been in a shared suite 2 blocks south, and before that, he had clerked for a circuit court judge in the Western District for 2 years after law school. He had been practicing property law in Rutherford County for 31 years. He had read the Laurel Bluff Estates easement when it was recorded in 1998. Not because he had been involved in the transaction, but because he read new easement recordings in the county index as a professional habit, the same way a physician reads the literature in their field. You stayed current. You knew what was in the index. He read it again the afternoon Clem called, pulled it from the county recorder's online database, printed it, read it page by page with the same attention he had given it in 1998, and that the intervening 25 years of property law practice had only sharpened. He called Clem back in 2 hours, as he had said he would. He began with the grant language, because the grant language was the foundation, and everything else had to be understood in relation to it. The easement granted non-exclusive vehicular access through the tunnel for residential ingress and egress. He told Clem what those words meant in the context of recorded easement law, and what they did not mean. Non-exclusive meant the tunnel owner retained the right to use the tunnel as well. The grant did not give the HOA sole possession of the access. Vehicular access meant the right to drive through. Residential ingress and egress meant the purpose of the access was getting to and from their homes. The grant was specific, bounded, and purposive. It gave the HOA's residents a rite of passage. It gave them nothing beyond that passage. Warren said, "The easement is an access grant. It is not a management agreement. It is not a joint operating agreement. It is not a shared governance instrument. The HOA has a right to drive through the tunnel. It does not have a right to tell the tunnel owner when to maintain it." Warren Ash's office was on the second floor of a building on the county seat's main road. A brick commercial building from the 1940s, the kind that had housed a hardware store on the ground floor for 50 years, before the hardware store moved to the highway strip and the ground floor became an insurance agency. Warren had been in the second floor office since 1998, the year the Laurel Bluff Estates easement was drafted and recorded, without his involvement, which he had occasion to note when Clem called him about it 25 years later. He had read the easement instrument the same afternoon Clem called, pulled it from the county recorder's online database, which the county had digitized back to 1970, and read it in the same sequence Clem had read it at closing. Grant language first, then the conditions, then the maintenance clause, then the remediation notice requirements, then the definitions. He had been reading recorded easements in Rutherford County for 31 years. He read this one in 20 minutes and called Clem back in 2 hours. The additional time spent reviewing the settlement document from 2022 and pulling the HOA's corporate filing from the State Secretary of State's database to confirm the entity's standing and the current officer list. He told Clem what the easement said. He told him what it did not say. He told him what Miriam Stokes's letter claimed and what the instrument actually supported. The easement, Warren explained, was an access grant. That was the beginning and the end of its legal character, and everything else in the instrument had to be read in that context. The grant language on page 1 established what the HOA had: a right of passage, the right to drive through the tunnel, the right of the 84 Laurel Bluff Estates households to use the bore as the vehicle by which they moved between the county road on the west face of the ridge and their homes on the eastern plateau. That right was real, it was recorded, it ran with the land, and it was binding on every future owner of the western parcel, including Clem. It was not a management agreement. It was not a co-ownership arrangement. It was not a shared governance structure that gave the HOA a seat at the table when decisions were made about the tunnel's maintenance, its assessment schedule, its operational hours, or any other aspect of how the tunnel owner managed a piece of infrastructure that sat on the tunnel owner's land. The distinction mattered enormously, and it was a distinction that Miriam Stokes's letter had either not understood or had chosen to paper over with the word unacceptable. Warren walked Clem through the specific claims in the letter against the specific language of the instrument. The letter's assertion that the HOA was entitled to advance notice of and input into maintenance and assessment decisions. Warren read the easement's notice clause, which required notice before a tunnel closure, specifically a closure, not an assessment, with a minimum 30-day notice period and a specific written format. The clause said nothing about assessments. It said nothing about input. It established a notification requirement before closures and left the decision-making about closures with the tunnel owner, who was required to give notice but was not required to obtain consent. The letter's assertion that Clem had conducted the assessment without HOA approval. Warren noted that the easement contained no approval requirement for maintenance or assessment activities conducted by the tunnel owner on the tunnel owner's property. The HOA's approval was not required. It had never been required. The instrument did not contain an approval mechanism of any kind for the tunnel owner's activities. Warren said, "She's read the easement as though it gives the HOA joint authority over the tunnel. It gives them a road through it. Those are different things." Clem told him he had read it the same way. The maintenance cost-sharing clause was the second matter, and it was the one Warren spent the most time on. The clause was on page 4 of the easement, a single paragraph, precisely drafted, the kind of clause that a careful attorney had written with the specific intent of making the obligation unambiguous. It stated that all costs associated with the maintenance, repair, and inspection of the tunnel structure, including both portal structures and the bore interior, would be shared between the western parcel owner and the easement holder in the proportions of 40% and 60% respectively. It defined maintenance costs broadly: labor, materials, professional fees, inspection costs, any expenditure reasonably necessary to maintain the tunnel in safe operating condition. It specified annual invoicing from the western parcel owner to the easement holder, with payment due within 60 days of invoice. The clause did not contain a dispute mechanism. It did not contain a provision allowing the easement holder to withhold payment pending an assessment methodology dispute. It did not contain a provision requiring competitive bidding for maintenance work. Those things were not in the instrument. The HOA had spent 2 years arguing, in its letters to the previous owner, that the methodology disputes and the competitive bidding requirement justified non-payment. They were arguing terms that did not exist in the document. Warren explained the legal consequence with the precision of a man who had spent 31 years being precise about recorded instruments. A recorded easement with a maintenance obligation attached was a conditional grant. The grant, the right of passage, was conditioned on the easement holder meeting the maintenance cost-sharing obligation. When the condition went unmet, the easement holder was in breach. The remedy for breach of an easement's conditions was not automatic termination. The law did not work that way, and Clem would not want it to, because automatic termination without process created its own legal exposure. The remedy required notice of the breach, a defined cure period during which the breaching party could make the obligation current, and if the breach was not cured within the cure period, legal action to enforce the obligation, or, in an extreme case, to seek termination of the easement for material breach. But, and Warren was precise about this, the breach created an asymmetry that was legally significant. The easement holder could not be simultaneously in breach of the instrument's obligations and in full assertion of the instrument's rights. An entity that had not paid its maintenance obligations for 4 years, net of the settlement that had resolved only the past arrears, could not simultaneously demand uninterrupted access, as though the instrument was being fully performed on their side. The breach did not extinguish their access right. Not yet, not without the legal process, but it was a fact that existed in the legal record, and it was a fact that Warren intended to make clear in the response letter. Clem asked Warren what the exposure looked like if the HOA continued to refuse payment. Warren told him that the maintenance cost sharing clause, if enforced through litigation, was a straightforward contract claim. Damages were the unpaid amounts plus interest. The cure period notice, if ignored, would support a breach of easement claim with a documented record. He told Clem he did not think it would come to litigation. He told him he thought the HOA's attorney, once they actually read the instrument, would give their client accurate advice about their position. Clem asked him to draft the response letter. Warren's letter went out on the following Monday, 10 days after Miriam's letter had arrived at Clem's mailbox, 5 days after Warren had reviewed the full instrument and the settlement document and confirmed his assessment of the legal architecture. It was 2 pages on Warren Ash's letterhead. The first paragraph acknowledged receipt of the HOA president's letter of October 21st and noted that Clem Hargrove had retained Warren Ash as counsel for matters relating to the western parcel and the tunnel easement. The second paragraph addressed the geotechnical assessment. It noted that the assessment had been conducted by a licensed geotechnical engineering firm, pursuant to the tunnel owner's standard due diligence and maintenance oversight responsibilities. It noted that the easement instrument contained no requirement for HOA approval or advance notice of assessment activities. It provided a summary of the preliminary findings. The bore section was structurally sound. The eastern portal headwall showed Category 3 deterioration, including active alkali silica reaction cracking, significant concrete spalling, and rebar exposure at the crown, with an estimated remediation timeline of 18 to 36 months before Category 4 progression without intervention. The final geotechnical report would be provided to the HOA as a courtesy when complete. The third paragraph addressed the maintenance cost-sharing obligation. It cited the clause by page and paragraph. It noted the HOA's payment history, current through 2019, unpaid in 2020 and 2021. The 2022 settlement, resolving past arrears only. No payments made since. It noted that the settlement agreement, a copy of which was enclosed, contained no release of future obligations. It enclosed an invoice for the geotechnical assessment cost. The firm's total fee had been $6,900. The HOA's 60% share, $4,140, with a 30-day payment period. It cited the payment terms of the maintenance cost-sharing clause. The fourth paragraph addressed the HOA's request for a confirmation that tunnel access would continue uninterrupted. It stated that the tunnel was currently open and operating normally. It stated that any planned closure for remediation work would be accompanied by the notice required under the easement's remediation notice clause, with the notice period and format specified by the instrument. It stated that the nature and timing of remediation work was a determination to be made by the western parcel owner, in consultation with the geotechnical engineering firm, and that the easement instrument did not provide the HOA with a role in that determination beyond receiving the required notice. It did not threaten. It did not use the word unacceptable. It stated the facts as the documents established them, and enclosed the invoice with a return address for payment. Warren sent its certified mail to Miriam Stokes at the Laurel Bluff Estates clubhouse address, and to the HOA's address of record with the Secretary of State. The response arrived 10 days later, not from Miriam Stokes, from a law firm, 2 partners, general practice, office on the county seat's main road, 4 blocks from Warren's building, a firm that Warren knew in the way that practitioners in a small county bar knew each other, by reputation, by the cases that had crossed paths over the years, by the assessments that accumulated quietly in the professional community over time. The firm handled estate work, business formations, some real estate, the occasional civil dispute. They were not specialists in property easement law. Warren noted that fact and set it aside. The letter was 3 pages. Its first position disputed the invoice on the grounds that the geotechnical assessment had been conducted without HOA consultation, and therefore the costs were not properly chargeable under the maintenance cost-sharing clause. Its second position disputed the assessment firm's findings, noting that the HOA had not had the opportunity to participate in the assessment process, and therefore reserved the right to challenge the findings through an independent review. Its third position disputed Clem's authority to conduct a geotechnical assessment without HOA approval, citing the HOA's interest in tunnel access continuity as the basis for a claimed consultation right. The fourth position demanded written confirmation that tunnel access would continue uninterrupted and stated that any closure without the HOA's consent would constitute a violation of the easement. Warren read the letter at his desk on a Thursday morning, with his coffee going cold beside him. He read it twice. He picked up the phone and called Clem. He told him the letter had arrived. He read him the 4 positions in sequence, his voice carrying the particular neutrality of an attorney delivering information he finds professionally remarkable. When he finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They've just argued that you need their approval to inspect your own tunnel." Clem was at the kitchen table with his own coffee, the final geotechnical report having arrived 2 days earlier, the Eastern Portal classification confirmed in writing. Category 3, immediate remediation recommended. He had read the HOA attorney's letter the previous evening when Warren had faxed it to the farmhouse. He told Warren he had read it the same way. Warren told him the letter's legal positions did not align with the easement instrument on any of the 4 points. The assessment was not a maintenance activity requiring cost sharing. It was a professional service engaged by the tunnel owner at the tunnel owner's discretion, and the fact that its costs were invoiceable under the maintenance clause did not create a retroactive consultation requirement that did not exist in the instrument. The HOA's claimed consultation right appeared nowhere in the easement. The claim that tunnel closure required HOA consent appeared nowhere in the easement. The demand for written confirmation of uninterrupted access was a request for a commitment the easement did not require Clem to make. Warren told him the letter read like it had been drafted by attorneys who had not yet read the easement carefully. Clem asked him what the next step was. Warren said the next step was a response that laid out the instrument's actual language against each of the 4 positions, clearly and without room for misinterpretation, and that enclosed the final geotechnical report and a formal remediation notice with the 60-day cure period the easement required. Clem told him to draft it. Warren said he would have it ready by end of week. Clem set the phone down on the kitchen table beside the final geotechnical report. He opened the report to the Eastern Portal section, the photographs of the crown rebar exposure, the crack monitor readings, the petrographic analysis confirming the alkali silica reaction classification. Category 3. Immediate remediation recommended. He looked at the photographs for a moment. Then he picked up his field notebook and his measuring tape and drove to the Eastern Portal. He wanted to walk the head wall one more time before the remediation notice went out. He already knew what the photographs showed. He wanted to see it again, in person. That was how he had always worked. 38 years of engineering, the documents and the field, each one confirming the other, neither one sufficient alone. The final geotechnical report arrived at Clem's email on a Wednesday morning in late November, 43 days after Sandra Price's team had finished their 2-day assessment, the laboratory analysis of the core samples having driven the timeline longer than the preliminary estimate. The report was 67 pages. Clem read all of it before lunch. The bore section findings confirmed what the preliminary had indicated. Structurally sound. The 4 concrete lining delamination zones noted and classified as Category 1. Present. Monitor. No immediate action required. The crack monitors bonded during the assessment had shown no movement in the 43-day interim period, confirming the lining cracks were arrested rather than active. The bore drainage was functioning. The competent rock sections showed no new fracturing. The Western Portal head wall was in adequate condition. Minor surface weathering, no rebar exposure, no active cracking. Standard maintenance recommended on the standard cycle. The eastern portal section ran 24 pages. Sandra Price had organized it the way a careful engineer organized a condition assessment of a deteriorating structure. Existing conditions first, then the failure mechanism analysis, then the progression timeline, then the remediation scope. The existing conditions were documented in 34 photographs, each captioned with the location, the condition observed, and the relevant measurement. Crown rebar exposure, 14 linear inches along the headwall's uppermost section. The concrete cover completely lost over that span. The rebar surface showing active corrosion, with measured section loss of 12 to 18% of original diameter at the most deteriorated points. Active water infiltration at 2 locations. The joint between the headwall and the rock face at the crown left quadrant, and a full-depth crack in the lower right panel, where the ASR cracking had coalesced into a through crack, carrying free water during rain events. The failure mechanism analysis was the section Clem had been waiting for. Sandra had done it correctly. She had not attributed the deterioration to a single cause, but had traced the interaction of the 3 mechanisms that had been operating simultaneously on the eastern headwall for, at minimum, 8 years. Water infiltration had been the initiating condition. The eastern portal faced into the prevailing weather, and the drainage above the headwall had been inadequate since the original construction. The 1974 design not having included a portal drainage channel that would have routed surface water away from the headwall face. The persistent moisture had activated the alkali-silica reaction in the concrete. The petrographic analysis of the core samples confirmed ASR gel presence throughout the headwall's concrete matrix, the reaction consuming the cement paste and expanding, creating the map cracking visible across the lower 2/3 of the face. The freeze-thaw cycling at the ridge elevation. The eastern plateau sat at 2,800 feet, freeze events occurring on average 67 nights per year, had driven moisture into the ASR cracks each winter, expanding them and driving off the surface concrete in the spalling sheets that had exposed the rebar at the crown. The 3 mechanisms had been compounding each other for 8 years. The result was a headwall that had lost 40% of its surface concrete, had active rebar corrosion at the most loaded section, and had 2 water infiltration paths carrying free water into the bore during precipitation events. Category 3 deterioration. Immediate remediation recommended. The progression timeline was 18 to 36 months to Category 4 without intervention. Category 4 was defined in the FHWA rating system as a condition requiring immediate closure, structural integrity compromised, continued operation, and unreasonable safety risk. Sandra noted in the narrative that the 18-month end of the range was the realistic planning horizon, not the 36-month end. The ASR reaction in the core samples showed a reaction rate that placed the progression timeline at the shorter end of the range when modeled against the site's annual precipitation and freeze-thaw data. The remediation scope was on page 51. Full removal of the existing eastern portal headwall concrete. The deteriorated concrete to be saw-cut and removed in sections. The rebar cleaned and coated where section loss was within acceptable limits and replaced where it was not. New formed and poured reinforced concrete headwall to match the original structural design with updated rebar cover specifications, and a waterproofing membrane between the new concrete and the existing rock face. A new drainage channel at the portal base to route surface water away from the headwall. A concrete apron at the portal sill to protect the bore floor from the drainage channel discharge. The contractor pricing was attached as an appendix. 3 bids, solicited by Sandra's firm from contractors with tunnel portal restoration experience. The bids ranged from $82,100 to $94,600. Sandra recommended the middle bid, $87,400, from a concrete restoration contractor in Hendersonville with 3 prior tunnel portal projects in their reference list. Clem's 40% share of $87,400, $34,960. The HOA's 60% share, $52,440. Clem forwarded the report to Warren the same afternoon it arrived. He called Warren at 4 p.m. Warren had already read the executive summary and the Eastern Portal section. Warren told him the report was thorough, the classification was well supported, and the remediation scope was consistent with standard practice for a Category 3 portal condition. He told Clem the report was the document they had been waiting for, the final, professionally certified, laboratory-supported basis for the remediation notice. Everything that followed would reference this report. He told Clem he would draft the formal notice. The notice went out the following Monday. Certified mail to Miriam Stokes at the Laurel Bluff Estates Clubhouse, certified mail to the HOA's attorney at the county seat firm, and first-class mail to the HOA's registered agent address with the Secretary of State. 3 copies, 3 delivery paths, the document the same in each envelope. Warren had drafted it in the format the easement's remediation notice clause specified. Written notice, identifying the nature of the required work, the estimated closure duration, and the closure start date, delivered no fewer than 60 days before the closure begins. The clause was specific about format and timing, and Warren had followed it exactly, the way you followed the specifications in a recorded instrument when the instrument told you how to do a thing. The notice stated, the tunnel's eastern portal structure required remediation per the attached final geotechnical assessment report, prepared by a licensed geotechnical engineering firm, and classifying the eastern portal as Category 3 deterioration, requiring immediate remediation. The remediation work, as described in the attached scope and contractor bid documentation, would require tunnel closure for an estimated 14 calendar days. The closure would begin 60 days from the date of the notice. During the closure period, no vehicular access through the tunnel would be available. The easement's non-exclusive access grant would be temporarily suspended for the duration of the remediation work, as permitted under the easement's maintenance and remediation provisions. The HOA's 60% maintenance cost share for the remediation, calculated at $52,440, was due and payable prior to the commencement of the closure. Warren's contact information was provided for payment arrangements. The easement's maintenance cost-sharing clause was cited by page and paragraph. The HOA's payment history since 2020 was summarized in 2 sentences, factual and unembellished. The 67-page geotechnical report and the contractor bid documentation were attached. The notice did not threaten. It did not editorialize. It cited the instrument, stated the facts, identified the obligation, and gave the timeline the instrument required. Miriam Stokes called Clem's cell phone at 3:17 p.m. on the day the notice arrived at the clubhouse. She had not called Warren. She had not written. She had picked up her personal phone and dialed the number she had used for the welcome call 7 weeks earlier, the call where she had told Clem she expected the tunnel access to continue exactly as it always had, and that she hoped he understood the responsibility that came with owning the tunnel approach. Clem was at the eastern portal when the phone rang, standing at the base of the head wall with his field notebook, making his own documentation entries to accompany the final report. He answered. She did not begin with pleasantries this time. She told him 14 days of closure was impossible. She said the word impossible with the emphasis of someone who believed the word was doing legal work. She told him 84 families depended on that tunnel. She used the number 84 as though he had not read the plat, as though he did not know exactly how many homes sat on the eastern plateau and had known since before closing. She told him he could not close it. She told him she would call the county. She told him she would call her attorney. She told him she would contact the state DOT. She told him the closure would destroy property values in Laurel Bluff Estates. She told him the community would not stand for it. And then, her voice reaching the register of a person who has worked up to the point they most want to make, she told him to open the tunnel. Open this tunnel! Clem was standing at the base of a concrete head wall, with 14 inches of exposed rebar above his head, and a crack monitor showing 2.3 millimeters of accumulated movement in the lower right panel, and free water seeping through the through crack at his eye level. He looked at the head wall for a moment after she said it. He told her the tunnel was open. He said it the way he said most things, without heat, without irony, without the satisfaction of correcting someone that would have been available to him if he had wanted it. He said it as a statement of current fact, which it was. The tunnel was open. It had been open when the notice was sent. It would remain open for the 60-day notice period. The notice was not a closure. It was the legally required advance notification of a future closure, provided in the format and timeline the easement specified. He told her it would remain open for 60 days from the notice date. He told her the notice was a legal requirement under the easement's remediation clause, and that he was providing it as the instrument required, 60 days in advance, in writing, with the engineering documentation attached. He told her the HOA's 60% contribution to the remediation cost, $52,440, was due before the work began. He told her Warren Ash's contact information was on the notice document if she wanted to discuss payment arrangements or a payment schedule. She told him the HOA was not going to pay $52,440 for a remediation they had not approved and did not believe was necessary. Clem looked at the crack monitor on the lower right panel. He looked at the seep line where the water was moving through the through crack. He looked at the rebar above the portal crown, the corroded steel, the concrete loss, the Category 3 classification documented on 67 pages by a licensed geotechnical engineering firm with 3 laboratory-confirmed core sample analyses. He did not say any of that. He told her he understood her position. He told her Warren's contact information was on the notice. She told him this was not over. He told her he agreed. He told her the remediation still needed to happen, regardless of how the payment question was resolved. The engineering report classified the condition as requiring immediate remediation. That classification did not change based on the HOA's payment status. The work was going to happen. She said something he did not fully hear. The call quality on the ridge was variable, and her voice had moved into a register that the limestone around him seemed to absorb. Then the call ended. He was not certain whether she had ended it or whether the ridge had. He put the phone in his jacket pocket. He made the field note, the time, the call, the substance of the conversation, Miriam's statement that the HOA would not pay. He noted the current condition of the through crack seep. He photographed it with his phone, the timestamp visible in the image metadata. He walked the full headwall face one more time, north to south, crown to sill. He noted everything. He closed the field notebook. Warren called the following morning. He had received a call from the HOA's attorney, the county seat firm, the previous afternoon, approximately 90 minutes after Miriam's call to Clem. The HOA's attorney had called to inform Warren that the HOA disputed the notice on 4 grounds. The remediation scope was contested, the cost assessment was contested, the closure duration was contested, and the HOA's obligation to pay prior to closure commencement was contested. Warren had listened to all 4 grounds and asked the HOA's attorney a single question. Had he read the easement's maintenance cost-sharing clause, specifically the payment timing provision on page 4? The HOA's attorney had said he was reviewing the instrument. Warren told Clem, "The attorney is reviewing the instrument." He said it in the tone of a man who had been told something he had expected to be told. Clem asked what the likely sequence was from here. Warren said the likely sequence was that the HOA's attorney would finish reviewing the instrument, read the payment timing provision, read the definition of maintenance costs, read the remediation notice clause and its requirements, and call Warren back with a different conversation than the 4 grounds dispute he had opened with. He said the likely sequence after that conversation was a payment proposal of some kind, a negotiation on the $52,440, a payment schedule, some form of arrangement that allowed the HOA to meet the obligation without the board having to present the full amount to 84 households as a line item in the next HOA meeting. He told Clem the 60-day period was the working timeline and that he expected movement within the first 30 days. Clem asked what happened if there was no movement. Warren said if there was no movement by day 45, he would send a breach notice, the formal notification that the HOA was in material breach of the easement's maintenance obligations, with a 14-day cure period, the clock running toward the legal action that the breach would support if uncured. Clem told him to proceed on that timeline. He drove to the eastern portal after the call and stood at the head wall for a few minutes in the November morning. The ridge was bare now, the hardwoods stripped by November, the limestone outcrops on the upper face visible through the leafless canopy, the sky above the portal opening a flat winter gray. The crack monitor on the lower right panel read 2.3 millimeters. It had read 2.1 millimeters the week before. The ASR reaction was active. The wall was moving in the way concrete moved when the chemistry inside it was working against it, slowly, continuously, without drama, without announcing itself. He photographed the monitor reading. He noted the date, 60 days. The tunnel was open. The notice had been delivered. The remediation was going to happen. The only question was, who was going to pay their share before the barricades went up? The HOA retained the Charlotte firm on day 11 of the 60-day notice period. The board member who found them was Phil Drummond, Lot 47, who worked in commercial construction management and had a contact at a Charlotte engineering firm through a project he had overseen 3 years earlier. The firm did geotechnical and structural work, primarily commercial, some municipal, occasional litigation support. The litigation support category was the relevant one here. Phil had called his contact and explained the situation. A tunnel owner claiming Category 3 portal deterioration, requiring immediate remediation, an $87,000 scope, a 60-day notice period, the HOA needing an independent assessment to challenge the finding. The Charlotte firm sent one engineer. His name was not on the Asheville firm's project reference list, and his firm's tunnel assessment portfolio, when Warren later pulled it, consisted of 2 prior projects, both highway culverts rather than bored tunnels. He spent 4 hours at the Eastern Portal on a Thursday in December, arriving at 9 a.m., departing at 1 p.m. The assessment conducted without core sampling equipment, without crack monitors, without the photographic documentation rig Sandra Price's team had used. He had a visual inspection protocol and a moisture meter and a structural hammer and 4 hours. His report arrived at the HOA attorney's office 6 days later. It ran 14 pages. The findings section acknowledged the deterioration. The spalling was visible. The rebar exposure was documented in his photographs. The map cracking in the lower panels was noted. He did not dispute Sandra Price's description of the existing conditions. What he disputed was the timeline. His assessment was that the progression to Category 4 was more likely in the 30 to 48-month range, rather than the 18 to 36-month range the Asheville firm had estimated, and that immediate remediation was not warranted on a 30 to 48-month horizon. His recommendation was a monitoring program, quarterly visual inspections, crack monitor installation, re-evaluation in 12 months. He did not dispute the Category 3 classification. He did not dispute the remediation scope. He disputed the urgency. The HOA attorney sent the report to Warren with a 3-page cover letter. The cover letter argued that the existence of 2 conflicting engineering opinions on the remediation timeline created a factual dispute that precluded Clem from proceeding with the closure. It argued that a tunnel owner, acting on a disputed engineering finding, was acting unreasonably and potentially in violation of the easement's implied covenant of good faith. It argued that the closure should be postponed pending resolution of the engineering dispute through a mutually agreed third-party assessment. It did not address the $52,440. Warren read the Charlotte firm's report and the cover letter on the same afternoon they arrived. He called Clem that evening. He told Clem the report did not dispute the Category 3 classification. He said it twice, because it was the most important thing in the report, and the cover letter had obscured it under 3 pages of procedural argument. The Charlotte firm's engineer had looked at the same Eastern Portal Sandra Price's team had assessed, and had reached the same categorical conclusion, Category 3 deterioration, and had differed only on the timeline estimate for progression to Category 4. Warren said the timeline dispute was real, in the narrow sense that 2 engineers had given different estimates, and it was not real in the sense that mattered legally. The easement granted no authority to the HOA over Clem's remediation timing decisions. The instrument did not say the tunnel owner must remediate only when both parties agreed on the urgency. It said the tunnel must be kept in safe operating condition, and a Category 3 classification, uncontested by either firm, was the professional engineering standards definition of a condition that required remediation, not monitoring. He told Clem he would respond in writing. He told him the response would be thorough. Warren's response was 5 pages. He opened with the classification question and did not move off it until it was resolved. He set the 2 reports side by side in a table that ran across the top of page 2. Asheville firm on the left, Charlotte firm on the right. Each finding category listed in rows. Existing conditions. Both firms documented the same conditions: the spalling, the rebar exposure, the ASR cracking, the water infiltration. Structural classification. Both firms classified the Eastern Portal as Category 3 deterioration. Remediation scope. Neither firm disputed the scope. the Asheville firm having provided the detailed contractor bid basis, and the Charlotte firm having offered no alternative scope. Timeline to Category 4. Asheville firm, 18 to 36 months. Charlotte firm, 30 to 48 months. Recommendation: Asheville firm, immediate remediation. Charlotte firm, monitoring with reevaluation in 12 months. Warren noted in the text below the table, the two firms agreed on the conditions, agreed on the classification, agreed on the remediation scope, and differed on the timeline by a range of 12 to 12 months at the outer bounds. The Charlotte firm's engineer had spent 4 hours on site without core sampling equipment. The Asheville firm's team had spent 2 days with core sampling, laboratory petrographic analysis of 3 headwall cores, and 43 days of crack monitor data. The Charlotte firm's timeline estimate was based on visual inspection only. The Asheville firm's timeline estimate was based on laboratory quantified ASR reaction rate data correlated with the site's precipitation and freeze-thaw cycle record. He noted, precisely without editorial, that the Charlotte firm's report did not contain any laboratory data, did not reference core sample analysis, and did not provide a quantified basis for its timeline estimate beyond the engineer's professional judgment formed during a 4-hour site visit. He stated the legal position in 2 paragraphs on page 4. As the tunnel owner, the decision on remediation timing rested with Clem Hargrove. The easement instrument granted the HOA a right of passage. It did not grant the HOA authority over the tunnel owner's maintenance and remediation decisions. It did not create a joint decision-making structure. It did not require the tunnel owner to obtain HOA agreement before acting on a professional engineering recommendation. The cover letter's argument that a disputed timeline estimate created a veto right for the HOA was a position without basis in the instrument. The third-party assessment proposal was declined. The easement contained no mechanism for a third-party assessment process. Warren was not prepared to agree to a process the instrument did not provide for, because doing so would imply that such a process was required, which it was not. The final paragraph requested the HOA's payment plan proposal for the $52,440 within 14 days. It noted that the 60-day notice period was running. It noted that the easement's maintenance clause required payment prior to closure commencement. It cited the page and paragraph. It stated that the absence of a payment proposal within 14 days would result in a formal breach notice under the easement's remedy provisions. Warren sent it certified mail. He faxed a copy to the HOA attorney. He called Clem after it went out and read him the key paragraphs. Clem told him it was accurate. Warren told him he thought the HOA attorney had read the easement by now, and that the next call from that office would be a different conversation than the cover letter had been. The emergency board meeting was called for a Tuesday evening in the 4th week of the 60-day period. 84 homeowners invited by email and posted notice at the clubhouse entrance. The meeting notice describing the agenda item as Tunnel Access and Remediation Update. The clubhouse meeting room held 60 in its standard configuration. Someone had moved the chairs into rows and brought folding chairs from the storage room, and the room held 71 of the 84 homeowners who showed up, the remainder standing along the back wall and in the doorway to the hall. Miriam Stokes ran the meeting from the front of the room. She had a presentation, slides projected on the screen above the whiteboard. The first slide showing a photograph of the eastern portal head wall, the second showing the closure notice, the third showing the $52,440 figure in large type. She presented the situation as she had understood it when the notice arrived. The tunnel owner had sent a notice claiming the portal needed remediation. The cost was $87,400. The HOA's share was $52,440. The tunnel would close for 14 days on a date 60 days from the notice. She presented the Charlotte firm's report as evidence that the remediation was not as urgent as claimed. She did not present Warren's 5-page response. She did not present the table comparing the two firms' assessments. She did not mention that the Charlotte firm had not disputed the Category 3 classification. The room was not calm. The questions came from all directions. What would happen to property values if the tunnel closed? What was the alternate route? Could the county be compelled to build an alternative access? Had anyone talked to the county commissioners? Who was this engineer from Asheville, And why should they trust his report over the Charlotte firms? Why was the HOA responsible for 60% of the cost? How long had this cost-sharing obligation existed? That last question opened the door that Miriam had not managed carefully enough. A woman in the third row, Lot 19, she had introduced herself to her neighbors when she moved in 2 years earlier as a retired family law attorney. Not a property attorney, but an attorney nonetheless, asked to see the easement instrument. She said she wanted to read the maintenance clause herself. Miriam said she had not brought the document. The retired attorney said the document was publicly available on the county recorder's database and asked whether anyone had a laptop. A man in the second row opened his. She gave him the book and page number. She had looked it up before the meeting, and he pulled it up and read the maintenance clause aloud at her direction. The room got quieter. A man near the back, Lot 62, a licensed general contractor who had been in the construction industry for 28 years, asked how long the cost-sharing obligation had been in the easement. The retired attorney told him since 1998, since the day the easement was recorded. He asked whether the HOA had been meeting it. Miriam said there had been some disputes about the assessment methodology in prior years. The contractor asked what the current arrears were. Miriam said the prior arrears had been settled. The retired attorney asked about the settlement. She asked whether the settlement had released the HOA's future obligations. She asked this in the precise way that attorneys asked questions to which they already had a strong suspicion of the answer. The room was very quiet for a moment. A board member, Sandra Cho, treasurer, Lot 33, said she thought they should let the HOA's attorney address the legal questions and move to the payment question. The HOA's attorney had called Miriam 4 days before the board meeting. He had called on a Thursday morning, and Miriam had taken the call in her car in the clubhouse parking lot because she had not wanted to take it inside. He told her he had read Warren Ash's 5-page response, and he had read the easement instrument carefully, the full instrument, page by page, and he needed to give her an honest assessment of the HOA's legal position before the board meeting. He told her the HOA's position was not as strong as she had presented it to the board. He walked her through it the way Warren had walked Clem through it, the grant language, the management authority the easement did and did not convey, the maintenance clause, the payment timing provision. He told her that a tunnel owner acting on a Category 3 engineering classification, providing 60-day advance notice as required, and invoicing the easement holder for their contractually specified cost share was doing exactly what the instrument authorized him to do. He told her the Charlotte firm's report, while useful as a timeline challenge, did not change the legal architecture because the easement did not give the HOA authority over the remediation timing decision. He told her the payment obligation was enforceable. He told her the breach notice Warren had referenced in the 5-page response was a real consequence with a real legal path attached to it. He told her the HOA's strongest position was not to refuse payment, but to pay under protest, preserving the right to challenge the timeline assessment in a subsequent proceeding, while avoiding the breach that would put the HOA in a worse position on the access right itself. He told her the board needed to authorize the payment. Miriam had sat in the car in the parking lot for a while after that call ended. The vote at the board meeting came after the attorney's position was presented. His written summary read aloud by Sandra Cho, the treasurer, because Miriam had asked her to present it. The summary was 3 paragraphs. It said the HOA's legal position on the payment obligation was not strong. It said paying under protest preserved the HOA's right to challenge the timeline assessment. It said non-payment created breach exposure that could affect the HOA's standing on the access right itself. The contractor from Lot 62 moved to authorize payment of the $52,440 under protest and without prejudice to the HOA's legal position regarding the timeline dispute. A second came from the woman on Lot 19. The vote among the board members was called. 4 in favor. Miriam abstained. The motion carried. The check arrived at Warren Ash's office on a Wednesday morning, 11 days before the closure window opened. The certified mail envelope from the Laurel Bluff Estates HOA, the check inside, drawn on the association's operating account in the amount of $52,440. The memo line reading, "Tunnel remediation cost share, paid under protest, without prejudice." Warren called Clem. He told him the check had arrived. He read him the amount and the memo line language. He told Clem the under protest language was the HOA preserving their right to challenge the timeline in a future proceeding, which was their right, and which did not affect the current transaction. Clem was at the kitchen table with the contractor's schedule in front of him. The Hendersonville firm had confirmed their mobilization date the previous week, the 14-day work schedule laid out day by day, the portal demolition beginning on day 1, and the final inspection on day 14. He told Warren to deposit it. Warren told him he would. He told him the closure could proceed as scheduled. Clem thanked him. He set the phone down and looked at the contractor's schedule. 11 days. The tunnel would close. The work would be done. The portal would be restored to a condition it had not been in for at least 8 years, and the HOA's maintenance obligation would be current for the first time since 2019. He picked up his field notebook and drove to the eastern portal. He wanted to photograph the crack monitor one more time before the contractor arrived. The reading was 2.6 millimeters. It had been 2.1 when the assessment team installed it. The wall had been moving the whole time. The tunnel closed on a Monday morning in January. Clem had driven to the western portal at 6:30 a.m., an hour before the contractor's crew was scheduled to arrive, an hour before the orange barricades went up, an hour before the Laurel Bluff Estates residents, who left early for work, would find the portal blocked and the 22-mile detour the only way off the plateau. He had walked the western portal approach in the January dark with his headlamp and his field notebook, making the final pre-closure condition notes he had been making at weekly intervals since the notice went out. He photographed the crack monitor on the lower right panel of the eastern head wall one last time, 2.7 millimeters, up from 2.6 the previous week, the ASR reaction indifferent to the human timeline running alongside it. He wrote the opening entry in the remediation section of his field log. Day 1. Closure commenced 700. Western and eastern portals barricaded. Contractor mobilized. Pre-closure condition documented. The Hendersonville crew arrived at 7:15 a.m. 6 men, a concrete saw truck, a skid steer with a demolition attachment, a flatbed carrying the forming materials and the rebar stock for the new head wall. The project foreman was a man named Dale Couch, who had done 3 prior tunnel portal restorations, and who had walked the eastern head wall with Clem twice during the pre-contract phase. Once when Clem was evaluating the bids, and once the week after the contract was signed. Dale knew what he was looking at on this head wall, and he had priced the job accordingly. Clem shook Dale's hand at the eastern portal and told him he would be on site every day. Dale told him that was fine, that he was welcome at the work face as long as he stayed clear of the demolition zone during the saw cutting. Clem told him he had been in tunnel construction for 38 years, and he knew where to stand. Dale looked at him for a moment and said, "Then you know this head wall is worse than it looks in the photographs." Clem told him he knew. He had been watching the crack monitor for 6 weeks. The demolition began at 8 a.m. on the eastern head wall face. The concrete saw cut the deteriorated sections into panels. The saw following the grid pattern Dale's crew had marked on the head wall face the previous week, the cuts defining the removal sections and protecting the adjacent concrete that was sound enough to retain. The skid steer's demolition attachment pulled the cut panels away from the rebar grid, the concrete coming off in the slabs that Sandra Price's team had predicted, the bond between the concrete matrix and the rebar, gone wherever the ASR reaction had consumed the cement paste, the concrete releasing from the steel with the particular ease of a material that had already failed internally. Clem watched from the observation point Dale had established, 30 feet back from the head wall face, clear of the demolition zone, the field log open on the truck hood in front of him. He wrote what he saw. The panel dimensions as they came off, the rebar condition exposed beneath each panel, the extent of the section loss on the crown rebar that Sandra's report had estimated at 12 to 18%, and that the actual demolition confirmed at the higher end of that range in 3 of the 4 crown sections. He noted the water infiltration paths as the concrete came away, the 2 locations Sandra had identified, and 1 additional seep in the upper left quadrant that the concrete cover had obscured during the assessment. He photographed everything, every panel removal, every rebar exposure, the water infiltration paths, the rock face behind the head wall where the 1974 construction had placed no waterproofing membrane, the bare limestone wet with the groundwater that had been finding its way through the rock and into the concrete for 50 years. He had designed infrastructure for 38 years. He was not going to stand in a farmhouse while someone worked on his tunnel. The Laurel Bluff Estates alternate route letter had gone out from Miriam Stokes the Friday before the Monday closure, a one-page document circulated by email to all 84 households. The alternate route described turn by turn, the 22-mile detour mapped, and the estimated additional travel time stated as approximately 35 minutes each way. The letter described the tunnel closure as resulting from the western parcel owner's decision to conduct remediation work. It described the closure duration as 14 days. It provided the alternate route and encouraged residents to adjust their schedules accordingly. It did not mention the $52,440 the HOA had paid 11 days earlier. It did not mention the 4 years of unpaid maintenance obligations that had preceded the notice. It did not mention the Category 3 deterioration classification, the 14 inches of crown rebar exposure, the active water infiltration, or the 18 to 36-month progression timeline to Category 4 that had made the remediation a matter of structural necessity rather than the tunnel owner's preference. It described the situation as Clem's unilateral decision. On day 4 of the closure, a homeowner on Lot 58 pulled the easement instrument from the county recorder's online database. He was not an attorney. He was a software engineer who worked remotely and who, with the extra 70 minutes of daily commute time the detour was adding, had decided to understand what he was actually dealing with before spending 2 more weeks driving 22 miles each way. He pulled Book 34, page 218 from the county recorder's site, read the full instrument, and found the maintenance cost-sharing clause on page 4. He read it twice. He read the payment timing provision. He looked up Warren Ash's response letter, which had been referenced in documents the HOA attorney had shared with the board, and which had found its way, in the way documents found their way in 84 household communities, to someone who was not on the board. He posted to the Laurel Bluff Estates neighborhood social media group that evening. His post was measured and factual. He quoted the maintenance clause directly, noted the 60-40 cost-sharing split, noted that the HOA had been responsible for 60% of tunnel maintenance costs since 1998, and asked whether anyone knew when the HOA had last made a maintenance payment. On day 6, a homeowner on Lot 22, Greg Paulson, a retired accountant, posted separately. He had also pulled the easement. He had also read the maintenance clause. He had done the arithmetic on the 4-year payment gap and the settlement and the $52,440, and he posted his findings in a numbered list with the source documents linked. The 2 posts accumulated 47 comments between them before Miriam sent a message to the neighborhood group's administrator, a homeowner on Lot 31 named Kevin Marsh, no relation, who had been running the group since it was created in 2019, asking that the posts be removed as they contained inaccurate information that was creating unnecessary alarm. Kevin Marsh read her message. He read the posts. He read the easement clause the posts had quoted. He replied to Miriam that the posts appeared to quote the recorded instrument directly, and that he was not going to remove factually accurate content from the group. The posts stayed. The comments continued. The work ran on schedule. Dale Couch had built the 14-day timeline with the knowledge of what the head wall contained. He had not padded it, and he had not cut it, and the demolition and forming and pour and cure sequence he had planned held through the January weather, which cooperated in the way January weather on a western North Carolina ridge occasionally did. Cold but dry, the temperatures staying above the pour threshold during the day, and the contractor's insulated curing blankets managing the overnight drops. Day 1 through 4, demolition and rebar work. The deteriorated concrete removed, the rebar cleaned and treated where the section loss was within tolerance, the replacement rebar spliced and tied where it was not, the rock face behind the former head wall waterproofed with the membrane system Sandra's remediation specification had called for. Day 5 through 7, forming. The plywood forms built to the head wall dimensions, the form ties set, the drainage channel form established at the portal base. Day 8, the pour. 6 cubic yards of concrete placed in a single continuous pour, the mix design specified for low water-to-cement ratio to minimize the ASR risk in the replacement concrete, the placement starting at the portal sill and working upward to the crown, the vibration ensuring consolidation around the rebar grid at the crown section, Days 9 through 13. Cure. The insulated blankets on the headwall face, the temperature monitored, the concrete developing its strength in the cold January air at the ridge's 2,800-foot elevation. Day 14. Form strip, inspection, and reopening. Clem was at the eastern portal at 8 a.m. on day 14 when Dale's crew stripped the forms. The new headwall came off the forms clean, the concrete surface as it should be, the form lines sharp, the drainage channel at the base correctly sloped, the waterproofing membrane visible at the joint between the new headwall and the rock face. Clem walked the face with Dale and Sandra Price, who had driven from Asheville to conduct the completion inspection. Sandra had her structural hammer and her moisture meter and her field notebook, and she worked the headwall face systematically, top to bottom, north to south, the same methodology she had used on the deteriorated headwall 3 months earlier. The hammer ring was solid throughout, no delamination, no hollow response behind the surface. The moisture meter readings were within the normal range for fresh concrete at this age. The drainage channel was directing water away from the headwall face correctly. Dale had run a hose at the top of the portal during the inspection to confirm the drainage performance, and the water moved down the channel and away from the portal base, exactly as the design specified. Sandra wrote the completion inspection entry in her field notebook. She told Clem and Dale the work was complete and the structure was sound. She told them the portal was ready to return to service. Clem looked at the new headwall for a moment, the gray concrete clean against the limestone face of the ridge, the portal opening framed correctly, the drainage channel running true at the base. He looked at the bore beyond it, 380 feet of limestone, the lighting strips running to the western portal, the rectangle of daylight at the far end where the January afternoon was bright and cold on the county road. Dale told his crew to pull the eastern barricade. Clem drove through the bore to the western portal and pulled that barricade himself. The tunnel reopened at 3:07 p.m. on the 14th day. He sat at the kitchen table that evening with the field log open to the remediation section. He wrote the final entry for the project. Day 14. Eastern portal restoration complete. New reinforced concrete headwall, waterproofing membrane, drainage channel at portal base. Completion inspection conducted by project geotechnical engineer. Structure confirmed sound. Tunnel reopened 3:07 p.m. HOA contribution, $52,440 received in full prior to closure. Maintenance obligation current. He looked at the entry for a moment. Then he wrote one more line below it. Easement conditions met by both parties for the first time since 2020. He closed the log. Outside, the January night was cold and clear on the ridge, the stars visible above the limestone outcrops, the lights of Laurel Bluff Estates visible on the plateau to the east. 84 households, the windows lit, the community going about its Tuesday evening. The tunnel between them and the county road was open, the eastern portal restored, the drainage running correctly for the first time in 8 years. The work was done. The tunnel had been open for 9 months by the time the October light came back to the ridge. The eastern portal stood clean and gray against the limestone face, the new concrete weathering slowly into its setting, the sharp form lines softening at the edges, the surface taking on the first faint mineral patina of a structure that was doing its job in a wet mountain environment without failing at it. The drainage channel at the portal base moved water away from the headwall the way the design specified. The waterproofing membrane behind the concrete face was doing its work invisibly, as waterproofing was supposed to do. The bore was dry. The lighting worked. The barricades were a January memory that the detour had made vivid for 2 weeks, and that the reopened portal had made irrelevant the afternoon of day 14. Laurel Bluff Estates residents were using the tunnel the same way they had used it before the closure, driving through without thinking about it, the way people moved through functional infrastructure without considering the engineering behind it or the maintenance clause that kept it functional. That was what sound infrastructure looked like from the inside. Invisible, unremarkable, present. Miriam Stokes had announced at the November board meeting that she would not be seeking a third term as HOA president. She gave no specific reason. Greg Paulson, Lot 22, retired accountant, was elected to replace her. In his first meeting, he proposed 2 items: a dedicated reserve fund for the HOA's tunnel maintenance obligations, seeded at $30,000 from the association's operating surplus, and a formal quarterly payment schedule with the western parcel owner, eliminating the arrears risk that had turned a routine maintenance obligation into a legal dispute and a 22-mile detour. Both motions passed unanimously. Warren Ash drafted the Maintenance Protocol Amendment the following February, a 2-page addendum to the original 1998 easement, a quarterly inspection schedule, a joint maintenance reserve account funded by the HOA's 60% contributions, a structured dispute resolution process for future assessment disagreements, not a veto, not a consent requirement, but a defined process with a timeline and a binding result. Clem signed. Greg Paulson signed on behalf of the HOA. Warren notarized both. It was recorded in the Rutherford County Deed Index the following week. Book 41, page 77. Cross-reference to Book 34, page 218. The 1998 grant and the 2025 protocol, side by side in the index. The legal architecture of the tunnel's shared life finally complete. The workshop frame was going up on the Western Plateau in October. Clem had poured the foundation in September, and the timber frame kit had arrived on 2 flatbeds in the first week of the month. He was doing the framing himself, methodically, without rushing, the satisfaction of building something correctly outweighing the efficiency of building it quickly. He walked the 1,200 acres each morning before the workshop work began. The fence line on the western and southern boundaries, the timber stands on the upper plateau, the drainage swales he had improved in the spring, the limestone outcrops on the ridge face where the geology that had made the tunnel possible was visible in the exposed bedding plains. He walked it the way a man walked land he intended to keep for the rest of his life, with attention, without agenda. He had no animosity toward Laurel Bluff Estates. He had spent 38 years designing infrastructure that people depended on and never thought about. Roads carrying thousands of vehicles daily without a single driver considering the drainage beneath them. Bridges holding without their users knowing the load rating or the inspection interval. Tunnels admitting thousands of passages per year without anyone understanding the portal classification system or the ASR reaction chemistry that threatened head walls when moisture and alkaline cement combined over decades without maintenance. He had designed all of it. He understood the invisibility as a feature. Infrastructure that worked was infrastructure you forgot about. The tunnel had been forgotten about. That was why the eastern portal had reached Category 3. That was why $87,400 of remediation had been necessary on a structure that consistent annual maintenance would have kept sound. He understood it. He had simply needed the legal architecture to reflect the physical reality, the easement's maintenance clause enforced, the cost-sharing current, the protocol in place so the next person who thought about sending a letter with the word unacceptable in it twice would find Book 41, page 77 before they did. On a Tuesday morning in October, he walked the tunnel. West portal to east, 380 feet of bored limestone, the cool mineral air, the lighting strips running the length of the crown, the bore dry and quiet. He walked at the pace he walked everything on this property, without hurrying, looking at what was in front of him. The eastern portal opened ahead as he walked, the rectangle of October light growing as he approached, the new head wall framing it, the drainage channel at the sill. He stepped through into the eastern plateau morning. He checked the drainage channel, water moving correctly from the previous night's rain, directed away from the head wall base exactly as designed. He checked the head wall face with his structural hammer. No new cracking, no surface scaling, the concrete sound throughout. No infiltration at the crown, no seep lines. The wall doing what a properly restored wall did. He opened the field log to the quarterly inspection page. Bore condition, sound throughout. Eastern portal condition, no deterioration observed, drainage functioning, waterproofing performing. Lighting status, all strips operational. He noted that the HOA's first quarterly maintenance contribution under the new protocol had arrived at Warren's office the previous Thursday, on time, in the correct amount. He closed the log. He stood at the eastern portal for a moment in the October morning, the plateau behind him, the Laurel Bluff Estates rooftops visible through the tree line, the ridge above, the 1,200 acres running west from where he stood to the county road on the far face. Then he turned and walked back through. The tunnel is his. The easement is recorded. The maintenance protocol is recorded. The 1,200 acres are his. The ridge is his. The only vehicular crossing for 11 miles in either direction is his, and it is sound, and it is documented, and it will remain both for as long as he tends it. He walked out the western portal into the October morning and drove back to the workshop. The frame was not going to raise itself.